Hello all, welcome to today's session. Today we are going to discuss the short story The Shape of the Sword, written by Jorge Luis Borges. Jorge Luis Borges was an Argentine short story writer, essayist and poet. He was born in Buenos Aires but later moved to Switzerland in the year 1914. His first collection of poetry, entitled Fervor de Buenos Aires, was published in the year 1923. He co-founded a journal named Prisma, and we can see that most of his writings are rooted in modernism. The Shape of the Sword is a short story published in the year 1942, and it is the story of an Irish man who recounts his experiences in the Irish War of Independence and how he received the large scar on his face. The Irish War of Independence, or the Anglo-Irish War, was a guerrilla warfare in Ireland from 1919 to 1921 between the Irish Republican Army and the British forces. However, it resulted in the creation of the Irish Free State. So this short story is set against the context of Irish War of Independence. So now let us move on to the story in detail. So Borges starts this story narrating as Borges himself. He happens to meet an Irish man who bore a vengeful scar on his face. Anyway, this Irish man was known as the Englishman at Lake Colorado. It is said that he came from Rio Grande and he was a smuggler over Brazil. Though he was harsh, he was fair. That is what the local people said on him. And people also said that he liked drinking. For once or twice in a year, he would shut himself in a room in his belvedere, that is his summer house, and he would drink for days. And he would only appear after 2 or 3 days with the dizziness of being drunk for several days. And regarding his behavior, he was standoffish. Standoffish means being distant or cold or hostile. And he knew very little Spanish and spoke in Brazilian accent. And except few occasional business letters or pamphlets, he got no other mails. So one day, the narrator, that is Borges himself, was forced to stay at the Lake Colorado with the Englishman due to an unexpected flood. The narrator started talking about patriotism because he didn't know how to begin the conversation. So in order to initiate the conversation, he started off with the topic patriotism. He said that a nation like England is too invincible or too powerful to be defeated by any external forces. And at this point, the Englishman revealed that he is not English, but he was an Irish man and he was from Dungarvan. But suddenly he stopped, as if a slip of the tongue had put him in trouble. And after that talk, they went out for an evening walk. And after some time, they were back in the dining room where they were served with a bottle of rum along with dinner. After some time, the narrator, that is Borges, happened to ask the Englishman about the scar on his face, the very mysterious scar over his face. And he agreed to tell the story behind the scar on one condition. The condition was too strange that he said that no contempt or condemnation be withheld, no mitigation for any iniquity be pleaded. That means after hearing the whole story, the narrator is not supposed to react with condemnation or contempt, or the narrator should not reduce the severity of the incidents mentioned in the story, or there should not be any means of unfair behavior. So, on that condition, he continued his story in English, interspersed with Spanish and even a little bit of Portuguese. So, the Englishman started his story. It was 1922, and in one of the cities of Connaught, he too was one among many young men who were fighting for Irish independence. One evening, a man from the place called Munster, one who is named John Vincent Moon, happened to visit him. And he was in his 20s, a thin, slack-muscled man who was an invertebrate, or one who had the very looks of a coward. And he had just mugged up some pages of one of those communist manuals just for the sake of vanity, and he never argued with anyone, nor did he indulge in an open debate on anything, but he just pronounced judgment, that too contemptuously as well as wrathfully. Now, as they were walking together, suddenly a gunfire stupefied them. They turned down in a dirt street, and a soldier asked them to stop. The Englishman started walking faster, but as he turned around, he understood that John Vincent Moon was not following him. He looked around and saw Mr. Moon standing motionless as a rabbit caught in fear. He ran fast, floored the soldier with a blow, and rescued Mr. Moon. The Englishman even had to carry Moon on his arms, for he was totally motionless. But soon a burst of rifle fire came their way, and a bullet almost touched Moon's right shoulder. They somehow managed to escape through the pine trees, and now they were in search of a perfect hideout. And finally they found one. They stayed at General Berkeley's country house. And this General Berkeley, he was at that time posted to some administrative position in Bengal. We know India was then a British colony. So British officials were sent to India for administrative purposes. And regarding the house, it was an old, gloomy, as well as dilapidated house, and a library with a large number of controversial books that dealt with the history of 19th century was one of its highlights. Then there were scimitars. Scimitars means small swords from Nishapur. Nishapur, we know it is now in Iran. So they somehow managed to enter the house through the back door, and as we know, Mr. Moon had received a wound on his right shoulder from the previous day's attack. The first thing the Irishman did was he bandaged Moon. However, the wound was a superficial one, and Moon said, "It was indeed a terrible chance that you took by coming back to save me." The next day, Mr. Moon inquired the Irishman all about the source of fund required for the revolutionary activities, and the Irishman replied truthfully that the situation was too bad and they were really struggling in shortage of money. Well, there were occasional rumblings of gunfire, and when the Irishman went down fetching his revolver from the bedroom upstairs, he saw that Mr. Moon was lying on the sofa with his eyes closed, as if he were sick. At this point, the Irishman realized that it was not because he was sick, it was because he was a hopeless coward. And they spent almost 9 days in General Berkeley's house. Occasionally, Mr. Moon would ask him about the strategies of his party, and often did he prophesy a disastrous end to their party due to the lack of money. And he would always criticize the ways and never spoke good about their party. Maybe it was an effort from his part to conceal his cowardice. That is why he made a great display of mental arrogance. So 9 days had passed. On the 10th day, the city fell into the hands of the Black and Tans. The Black and Tans here reference to the constables recruited into Royal Irish Constabulary. That is, during the time of British administration in Ireland, the British administrative force tried to build up this RIC, that is Royal Irish Constabulary, with British recruits. Their main target was to suppress the Irish Republican Army. And the usage Black and Tans arose from the color of their impoverished uniform they initially wore. Anyway, on the 10th day, the city fell into the hands of this Black and Tans. So on the 10th day, the situation was getting worse. And when the narrator came back to the house after an operation, he overheard Moon talking to someone on telephone about the Irishman. It was all about him, about his party, and about their secret plans. He understood that Mr. Moon was indeed selling him as well as his party, and arrangements were made to arrest the Irishman. On hearing this, he somehow managed to corner Mr. Moon and snatched a scimitar from General Berkeley's armor and made a half-moon shape of blood over his face. This time, Voorhis, the narrator of the story, interrupted, and he noticed that the Englishman's hands were trembling, and Voorhis asked what happened to Mr. Moon, to which the Englishman replied, Mr. Moon fled to Brazil with the Judas money he received by betraying the Irishman and his party. And towards the end of the story, the Englishman pointed towards the crescent scar on his face and asked our narrator Voorhis, do you not believe me? And don't you see the scar on my face? See, it was I who betrayed that poor Irishman who saved me and gave me shelter. And I am Vincent Moon. Now, if you want, you can despise me. So, Vincent Moon was indeed confessing the whole thing to Voorhis. And there is one reason why Mr. Moon told the story to the narrator. The reason was that the narrator, Voorhis, was totally a stranger. And if Voorhis despises him, his contempt won't be so painful. Now, we can see that there is a play of identities in this short story. And Voorhis's emphasis is on the fact that an individual voice plays a significant role in shaping histories as well as the reader's perception or view. And there is an intricate layering of narrative voices, or there is a play in voices. We know the initial narrator is Voorhis himself, and he plays a dual role of a writer as well as the initial narrator. Then there is the second storyteller or the second narrator, that is the Englishman, who provides all those historical backdrop to the events that takes place in the story. And we can notice that with the shift in narrator, that is when the Englishman become the storyteller, there is a new protagonist, that is Mr. John Vincent Moon. And Moon's character is presented from the Englishman's perspective. And obviously the stress on Moon's negative traits makes him an anti-hero. There is also a sort of artificiality that is related to the story. The moon-shaped scar and the confession becomes a trick played on the readers by the omniscient author, that is Voorhis. Thus, Voorhis emphasizes on the fact that an individual voice always has a power in shaping a believable story. So that is all about the shape of this word. Thank you for listening and watching.